Hello and welcome to the Ecclesia podcast, where we are sharing stories and conversations about what it looks like to live in a holistic Christian missional community. I'm Jeremy Schrader, here with my friend Eric Wally. And Eric, this week we're
talking to Eric Graham and Chris C. Sorry, I cut you off. We'll keep going though. But we're wrapping up the Theology of the Body series, which we've been in for the past 4 or 5 weeks. And for a lot of us who've heard the sermons, who's been in the room, maybe you've watched online, it's elicited a lot of response because it is a subject that just is naturally going to bring a reaction. And so for us, today we wanted to, in some ways, close out that conversation with Ericka and Chris as they talk a little bit about their experiences with the body and even just their experiences preparing to give these messages. What have some of the responses been? And in some ways also offering what's the path forward? And Pastor Chris touches on this, but just as a reminder, we'll say it a few times. We are putting together some resources. There is a group that's going to be put together in the new year around some of these topics. And you can find all that at ecclesiahouston.org/the body. We'll have all the sermons, resources, this podcast as just a place where you can, if you want to continue this conversation, you can. So without any further ado, here's our conversation with Ericka and Chris.
We don't get to hang out that often anymore.
I know.
And today we get to hang out and talk about something we both care about a lot in this series, which is really fun. And then we get to invite other people in our conversation, which my guess is, based on our typical conversations, will be really meaningful and interesting, and who knows where it'll go.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear just like your experience. Now you preached this last weekend. You're going to be preaching to close out the series. What your experience has been like listening to the series and participating in it, and maybe how that's different or anything you think.
I've really been enjoying this series, and I think I've heard that reflected in our community as well. And I loved what you said kind of at the beginning of the series, that this is something we don't always talk about. And it's the most human thing ever, to live in a body. It's quite literally like what it means to be human. And it can be isolating sometimes in our bodies, and to talk about it openly and talk about the different layers of trauma or shame and all that we experience in a body, and how to really integrate that in a meaningful spiritual way. It's been healing for me to hear these and be a part of it.
Yeah. Preaching it has been, for me, maybe one of the hardest sermons to preach, in part. And we learned this. It's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast. We started talking about this in staff meetings. And I noticed when we started talking about our bodies, people started to react in their body. You could see people start to kind of twitch a little bit. People got really uptight. You could feel the room shift, right? And it was like, oh my God, I don't want to talk about my body. Or this is really hard, or it's really triggering. And I'm enough of an empath, and I think especially when I preach, I'm reading the room, and we've had multiple people as I preach cry to the point they had to get up and leave, or, physically shaking through the sermon to the point that it's, you want to stop and go and embrace them. And I think we all, we get triggered in our bodies, like we carry our life with us, right? So it's a vulnerable moment that it's coming out. I think the most hopeful thing for me about it, I'd say it's some of the hardest sermons to preach, because I'm aware of that. And if you say, Sean says often, like, people always hear the wrong thing. And if you don't say something exactly right, you could actually do some harm for people and the way they understand their body or sexuality, and that part feels really delicate, right? And you want to care well for it. But I will say, I feel like, and I credit the community for this, like we have the kind of community that people have felt safe enough to bare their souls in some ways. And a lot of people have come forward to me with stories they haven't shared before, repressed memories, things that are coming out. Our body, isn't it amazing? Like how often, and people don't realize how many people have those kind of repressed memories, right? That you literally erase something from your, it's Body Keeps the Score talks a lot about it, right? That you have this ability to erase it and deal with it when you're actually healthy enough to deal with it, right? And it comes back. So knowing that we're preaching on something like this means we're inviting people to engage some of those things. And all those things are hard, right? But they're the only way forward, to a better path. And the truth is, like, when we live well in our bodies, like, everything's better, When you wake up in the morning and you're like, you ache from pain and shame and, fear, it's a bad way to live. So that part makes me really hopeful that maybe people are catching on to something that could really change the way we live every day.
Yeah. I think that very first sermon that kind of framed the body as not this like rotten flesh, but something that was good and made in the image of God. I think of if I would have lived that and believed that as a teenager, just how different my whole experience would be.
Yeah.
I think as a woman, and the more I listen and read, I understand men go through this too. They just don't talk about it in the same way. But I remember being a teenager and going on a diet and losing weight to get faster in track. And as an athlete, it was always this war, like me against my body. And if my body was hurting, if she was tired, if she was hungry, it was a nuisance. Yeah. It was annoying. It was to be overcome, not listened to. And I think in athletics a lot, that kind of mind over matter mentality, like override anything your body tells you until it catches up to you. And then I had a bunch of stress fractures and was injured. And, I think to believe that our body has wisdom and to believe that wisdom is good and offering us important information.
Yeah.
Hillary McBride, who does a lot of work on embodiment, she has this exercise where she refers to her body as she for this very reason. Because when she thinks that her body is hungry or tired or sad, a way to really humanize it is to say, she's hungry, she is tired, she is exhausted. And you would never look at someone else and be like, no, you aren't. You're fine. Get up, drink more coffee. But to yourself, you do that all day.
Totally.
And so I wish that first sermon I had when I was 13 years old and that I would have believed it too.
And to think like that we get to raise our kids, hopefully at Ecclesia, in a place that hopefully our kids do hear that, right? That there are a lot of messages that, if anything is worth pushing through the painful parts of engaging this subject, is that kids would grow up without the same kind of shame around sexuality, that they would look at their bodies and listen to their bodies. And, I don't know what we had this fear, like we were going to be lazy or something, or just something that was like, just push. And it just like, it wasn't good for us. Right. And instead to have a self-talk. And that's what I'm learning. Almost no one, at least my age, has a healthy self-talk to themselves about their body. Right. So that's probably a good thing for me to practice. Like in reference to my body, like, he needs this. He needs sleep.
Yeah, because you'd never be like to someone else, no, that's not real.
Yeah. Kristen and I are really different in the kind of shows that we watch, and I've realized a lot of it is because, one, she loves cheesy sitcoms that I think are ridiculous, and second,
would get along.
She loves Law and Order SVU and like all the Dateline specials where somebody gets killed, and literally, if I watch one of those, I get so like I want to go pastor those people, because I'm used to being the person that was there after somebody gets murdered, and when somebody has committed suicide. And I end up being one of the first people there. And so when I hear those stories, there's nothing good about it for me. I can't do it. My body literally, and I have to listen. Early on, it was like, well, I'm just going to push through and I'm going to watch a couple of these, right? And I just realized like, this is not good for me. My body is telling me, do not watch this show. Like, it's just not, it's not healthy or good. And for different people, like, she's an amazing person, right? And everybody loves those Dateline podcasts. And I just don't. I just can't do it. And so we're all different. We have to listen to ourselves like, okay, that's not good for me. So I love at the end of the day around all of this that legalism was so destructive in my youth and the churches that I see it so dominant in. And Paul's teaching is really, really helpful in terms of like, everything's permissible. Is it beneficial? And then we all get to ask that question. Like for me, watching Dateline is actually sinful. I would not be a better person. Now, for somebody else, it's great. It's just not beneficial for me. I don't know if that even makes sense to most people.
Yeah, it does make sense. We once were watching this Netflix series. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a family in Wisconsin, which is where I'm from. And it was kind of like a murder mystery type show. And I had the same impulse. I was really obsessed with this case. Like, couldn't let it go. You know, if my husband's eating peanut butter and jelly, it's like, how can you eat right now? We got to figure this out, you know? And I found their address and I sent them an edible arrangement. And I told my friends, we were all watching the show together, and they're like, you did what? I'm like, I sent them an edible arrangement. And they're like, what is a basket of fruit going to do? And to this day, they'll be like, remember when Ericka sent them an edible arrangement? But I get it. You know, I too, like, I can be consumed by it.
Yeah.
And a need to act, even if I'm powerless over the situation at hand.
That is so Ericka to send.
And like pineapple.
I've got to do something.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. As I think through all of this, I'm curious your thoughts on like, how do you hope it changes us, like as a church, to go through this series, to think about our bodies. I mean, you've talked a lot about your journey with like exercise being not healthy in the past, like how as a woman that now, right, to me, it's still the greatest miracle of all things that you women can give birth to a human being, right? And Jet is like a massive human being.
She's not small.
Like how does that even happen, right? And how do we go through those things and then somehow pretend like they're normal and not have this awe, right, for the body? And birthing kids, right? My favorite, I talk about it way too much. It's probably creepy, but when our kids were born, I read from cover to cover this massive book by Sears and Sears called The Baby Book, right? And it was all about the medical parts but it explained things like how breast milk works, right? And how it changes in the different stages, and how the mucus from the baby's mouth on the mother's breast would tell the mother's body what immunities the baby needed, and the milk would change. And it was just for me like mind blown. I could not believe that God made our bodies that could do all of that, right? I mean, what has that journey been like, and how has that affected we all have this antagonistic relationship with our bodies. Surely after that, there's got to be a little bit like, wow, I'm a badass. Like I gave birth to a human. Like,
yeah. I think, first of all, for pregnant, I was one of those like weirdos that loved being pregnant. Loved it. Every second of it. I think with so many years of trying to control my body, it was the ultimate surrender to just be like, my body is housing a human.
Interesting.
I remember a professor once, I was taking classes when I was pregnant, and the professor was like, you didn't do very well on this assignment, blah, blah, you missed this part. And I was like, normally that could send me into shame. And I was pregnant at the time, and I was like, I'm growing eyeballs today. So if I get a B on this assignment, like, are you making an eyeball right now? It's just amazing. And I think we forget like how absurd and beautiful and like mysterious the whole process is. So for me, it was like the ultimate surrender to just say my body is housing this other human and growing a human. And then it's funny, my child is huge. She's he's a big boy, and I've not weaned him yet. And in the airport, like especially there's like nursing is magic on a plane. It can just knock him out into a nap.
And keep their ears from popping.
It's the best, yeah. And I'll get some looks. I like put a blanket over both of us, so we're just like this giant red ghost on a plane. And it's like a big child. And I know that's like, I used to judge those moms. I'd be like, the kid can walk and talk. You should maybe take him off.
Yeah.
But it's also been a practice in trusting myself and my body.
Yeah.
And even if, the world thinks it's a little weird to have a child that big that hasn't been weaned, to your point, I'm just in awe of the whole process.
Yeah.
And my husband will say I get cocky about it because Jet will have a cold. I'll be like, I got the antibodies. Don't worry about it.
I mean, it's a miracle.
It is.
It's a miracle.
It's funny.
And Jet, right, ought to have some prerogative and like that. I mean, that.
Yeah.
How you do that, right, is just still, it's beyond me.
And I also will say, I'm also aware that like breastfeeding is such a privilege and gift. And a lot of women aren't able to do it for a number of reasons. And I'm not someone who's like, breastfeeding is the only way.
Yeah.
But it has been healing for me specifically.
But the fact that your body is capable of it is something we should be in awe of, right? And everybody's got a different work situation and life situation and different health issues and whatever it is. But the fact that God created women in a way that you can bring life into existence in that way, it's still just like, and that God could have, like, it could have happened any kind of way, right? But there's this transition of like getting to know Jet in the womb, and then this beautiful transition of birth of him coming out into the world, and and him being so vulnerable to get to be cared for, right? And which I know is a part of like all of our stories, and that we all like, none of us had perfect parents, right? So you have the best. I mentioned in one of the sermons just that, because if we talk about the body, you got to talk about shame. You talk about sex, you got to talk about shame. Yet for a lot of us, even our origin, right? Not every person is planned. Like parents were not like, we are perfectly financially ready. We are married. We are like, now we're going to have a baby. Some people, it happens that way. A lot of us were just like, oh crap, we're having a baby, And I think a lot of us pick up on that part of our story, right? That I was born into a little bit of a chaos, or maybe I was a crisis. Or maybe my parents just weren't mature enough to be parents yet. And a lot of them figured it out along the way. But we all have some wounds that go way, way back. And it's so hard, like in therapy and other places, to try to figure out, like, you don't have conscious memories of that, but we all have these childhood wounds that shape us. And my hope is that this series is a place that all of us could go, hey, that's normal. Like, that's okay. I'm not the only person sitting on my row that feels like I was born into a shameful situation.
Yeah. And I feel like naming that and noticing it in yourself and naming it is like how it gets out.
I mean, that's what The Body Keeps the Score. Essentially, like, if people haven't read the whole book, it can be a bit dense. But at the end of the day, it says like there is power in naming it, and there's power in walking with people. So when you finally acknowledge, like, hey, I kind of raised myself, like my parents weren't around, or whatever it is, right? That was part of your trauma and your story. Just saying it is the first big step forward, right? And instantly you start to go, oh, I feel a little bit better. Like that explains something, right?
Yeah.
And again, therapy is not everything, but sitting with a therapist that goes, will on a regular basis say, I'm amazed that you're functioning as well as you are, right? Or that like you went through a lot. Just when another person tells you that, like that's a lot to carry, you feel like, oh, okay. Yeah. I'm not crazy, Yeah. And that's a really good thing for everybody, because we all grew up and were raised in this broken world.
Yeah. And I feel like therapy, in recovery, the kind of freedom it gives you access to, you can then use that in the world. Like sometimes you don't even know you're in a cage until you go to therapy and realize the ways in which you're operating. have been how your body's hanging on to old stuff that you didn't even realize.
Yeah.
One thing I learned about myself in therapy was that when I was young, I was a really late reader. I was a late developer, just like intellectually in school. I was behind. I'd get pulled out of class to go to like a special reading group. This was in first grade.
Yeah.
And I viscerally remember the feeling of getting up from a table and going into a special room. And I also remember being at that same table and the teacher saying, we need the talented and gifted kids, and all my friends leaving for the talented and gifted program. And to this day, what I've realized is I chase approval from people I think that are smart, and I want them to think I'm smart. And that like has been exhausting. Like if that's my goal, is to like make quote unquote smart people think I'm quote unquote smart, I'm going to be exhausted at the end of my life.
Yeah.
And so to just like notice, oh, I'm doing this and this is why, and I don't have to. Now I have access to freedom and more time, and I can identify it. Oh, yeah, you want this person to think you're smart. Just don't go there, Ericka.
Yeah.
And now I have more energy for the world. So it's like, I didn't think that was why I did what I did, but it was.
Yeah.
So it's just endlessly giving and generative.
Most people would never guess that, right? Would
Right.
never know that about your story.
Yeah.
And everybody has those
For
places,
sure.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That we thought, and we were, whether it was from parents or from a
Yeah.
teacher or from peers, we heard things that were cruel. And the way that our brains work, I don't understand it, but we hold on to that thing.
Yeah.
And we don't remember as well the teacher that said, you're awesome.
Right.
And we somehow gloss over that.
Yeah.
And again, it motivated. I had a high school teacher that told me I was an awful writer, right? And every book I wrote, I wanted to send to her and just say, how many books have you written?
Yeah.
She was so mean. And you wonder like, why are people mean?
Yeah.
But the truth is and we know this in community, hurt people.
Yes.
And so we turn around often and end up doing the same things that we despised if we don't get some healing and make a journey.
And waking up to that cycle and pattern. Like you said, my first day in therapy, I remember saying, I don't really need to be here. This is going to be kind of a one-off. I want to get consulted on one issue and then you'll never see me again because I'm fine. And then 3 years later, I'm still doing the process. And I think there are recovery communities that are free of charge.
Yeah.
Therapy also is such a luxury, and there are so many ways, I think, to be in communities that engage honestly.
Yeah.
And it's that honesty. And I think that's what this series is offering our community, is a space to be honest about a subject that isn't easy to talk about, as you mentioned.
No. And the thing I'm really grateful for is the number of people that have reached out to me and shared really difficult parts of their story. And I'm really hopeful that they're going to and we've offered, early in the series, I mentioned that when I was at seminary, we were told that 1 out of every 4 people had experienced some kind of sexual abuse. And early in ministry, I realized the number was a lot higher. And I had a conversation with my parents about this last week. Chris and I went to visit them after my dad had been in the hospital. And instantly when I said it, and I told them, a lot of people are reaching out to me right now because somebody hit my phone with a message about sexual abuse while I was there. And I said it to my parents, and my parents instantly go, it's 1 and 2. Now, that's anecdotal, right? But in their experience, and if you think about, for a lot of us, people that that you're close to, if they've opened up to you, start to realize the number's really high. So our friend Dan Allender has written what is considered the landmark book on healing from any kind of trauma, really, but particularly if people have endured any kind of sexual abuse. And I really do think it's the most evil, in the place that we're supposed to be most vulnerable and experience the most beauty, for that to be a place of violation and violence, right? And I mean, sexual violence is the most evil. And so just to be able to name like anything we've endured in that area, like we need healing on. We need to. So Paul Randall's going to be doing a book group. In fact, if people go to the website, we're going to have a lot of resources at ecclesiahouston.org/thebody. And on that site, we'll have some books and resources that people that want to continue this journey. And one of those will be encouraging people to participate in that Wounded Heart book group. But I know in my own journey, for me, a lot was just the secondary trauma that I endured as a pastor. Because forever, I just thought it was normal that you show up when somebody gets killed and you're there to pray with them and love them. And I had more times than I could count that I left home with blood on me, or it's just, and you get home and you're like, that was a lot. And I finally started doing EMDR, which if people haven't done it, I really recommend finding somebody that has the actual paddles that you put in your hand, because it just, they vibrate and your eyes do what they do when you're sleeping and your brain is, and I finally unpacked like a massive load of just bad experiences. They'll have you journal all these. And I'll never forget, I got in the car and I felt my neck and I was like, it's never felt like that before. Like it was always a rock, and it felt like, that feels like a muscle, fiber and tendons and I could move. And I was just like, that's how I want to live going forward. And my guess is there are a lot of Ecclesians that are carrying things in their body that it was just normal for me to live with that. And my neck and my back hurt. And there wasn't enough massages in the world that could deal with that. That something about pursuing that healing. And you think you're going to the therapist for one, right? And it just, it starts to pour out of you. And hopefully it's a safe place. I will say as well, a lot of therapists do group therapy. And group therapy can be really, really powerful. In part because you're getting to care for other people and other people are getting to care for you. And often in group therapy, you get to address people, like for some of you to confront, let's say your abuser or your mother, or it wouldn't actually be helpful to sit down with them. But in group therapy, you will often, they would say, Ericka, Ericka's going to be your mom, talk to her, right? And I mean, in that moment, like you become my mom. And I say to you things that, not if my mom's watching, I don't really need to talk to you about anything, but offer that healing that can be really, really helpful. So wherever, that healing path leads, my hope is people will just take it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think too, as you talk about therapy and what it's called EMDR.
EMDR.
Right? Like one thing I've noticed while doing this series is how integrated the mind, body, soul is. We talk about them like they're three separate things. Yeah. And what all these sermons has revealed is that there's so much interconnection and untangling it. Like here you release some trauma in your body that showed up in the back of your neck. And that's something that I think is so important and also like really exciting moving forward, because some of this like scientific research is relatively new. And yet scripture has like revealed this 2,000 years ago, this truth that like, hey, the Trinity is also real in your bodies in some ways.
Yeah.
And it's all interconnected.
Yeah. And the truth is, when you're carrying shame, right, from spiritual environments that weren't healthy or good, or like, you're going to be sick to your stomach. Some people think like, I don't know, maybe you need to go to the doctor for irritable bowel, or maybe you're carrying some things you don't need to carry, and you need to forgive somebody. And I'm amazed when I make progress in those ways, how different I feel in my body. And for people to realize as well, especially when you've come from dysfunction in your family, like when your home is a safe place and you feel safe and loved and cared for there, you feel like you can rest there, you're just a better person all the way around. So do whatever you have to do to live in an environment that feels nurturing and healthy and good for you. And, you'll be better at work. You'll be a better friend. You'll be a better daughter or son of God. You're going to be a better brother or sister. And it, what we eat and how we sleep and all those things, they really, really matter.
Yeah.
So Ericka, when you're going to preach the last sermon in this series, as we process trauma and grief and a lot of bad ideas about the body and the body being bad, and as we move forward, what are the things that you're learning this week that you're going to share that you think will be hopeful and helpful for people?
Yeah. Well, I think this series has allowed us, first of all, to feel these uncomfortable feelings that we maybe didn't even realize we were running from. And then it's like, well, what do you do with this feeling? And the last sermon is going to be on the body of Christ as a whole, both as a metaphor and literally the body of Christ, and kind of what that has done for us, and also how we can bring this healing into our lives, into our churches, into the larger body of Christ. One kind of metaphor that I love for this last sermon is I recently discovered that the Latin word from religion is to religar. That's the Latin version. And what that actually means is to bond. That's where the word ligament comes from, re-ligament.
Yeah.
And the ligament is the perfect body metaphor for holding together. And so when religion is done well, it's going to hold together the body of Christ.
Oh, that's good.
And what I love about that is I often use religion as a bad thing. You hear a lot of young people say spiritual, but not religious.
Yeah.
Or I have people come up to me all the time and they're like, my daughter won't go to church. She lives in Atlanta. Please pray for her. And I do, but I have to wonder if the daughter doesn't go to church for good reasons.
Yeah.
And maybe religion, if it's doing what it's supposed to, is connecting and being that re-ligament within the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And so, I'm hoping to, with this last sermon, just encourage people to bring that healing into the world, because the best thing about, I think, healing trauma and cycles is that it's going to heal others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And healing in isolation is never the point. In fact, I don't even think it's possible.
Yeah, I don't think it is. Well, it lands perfectly with kind of my big hope for this series, that my guess is a lot of people felt like they were alone. Like they would look at somebody else and say, well, they're beautiful. They love their body. They're this, and the truth is all of us have this struggle, and all of us have pain and trauma as a part of our story. And so this hope that we would actually be brought together, not live in isolation with some of these things, and that we could find healing and hope and could practice, one of the Ecclesia rhythms, that we would just be real with each other, and we'd share our real stories and our real feelings and our real pains. And if we'll do that, I'm really hopeful that we'll experience healing. I think the religion and the religious culture you're talking about that I grew up with was this kind of fake it till you make it, and it didn't really work. This pretending to be better than we are, and instead, let's acknowledge where we're at, and then let's get someplace better together, and let's talk to each other in kind ways and build one another up. So wherever you're at in that journey with your body, I hope that you hear in this series that the Western norms and ideals for beauty and health and all the rest of it ought to be thrown out, and that your body is really, really good, and God gave it to you. And I hope that you can use it for beautiful things, to experience joy and pleasure, and that in the midst of the pain of the world, that we make a journey together that would be really healing. So thanks for joining me, Ericka. This podcast series has been really fun, and I hope all of you that have watched it, if you missed any episodes, go back and watch them. I hope it's a blessing. Thanks for being with us, and we're looking forward to journeying together through Advent. It's a really important season in the life of the church, and it's one that we get to bring clean water to people all across the globe. So God bless you, and have a great day.